When people talk about the greats of Japanese women's professional wrestling, there are certain wrestlers whose names are almost guaranteed to crop up. 80s fans will likely talk about Chigusa Nagayo and Lioness Asuka. For 90s fans, it will probably be names like Manami Toyota, Akira Hokuto, and Aja Kong. For more modern fans, Miko Satomura, Shiori, Io Shirai, and Mayu Iwatani. But if there's one wrestler that I feel doesn't get as much love and praise as she deserves, I think it's Bull Nakano. Bull Nakano is generally remembered, by Western fans at least, for her brief runs in WCW and the WWF, as well as her distinctive wild look. But reducing her to just her image would be doing her a huge disservice. Nakano was a wrestler of incredible versatility and heart. She could brawl, grapple and fly, all with a charisma and fearsome presence that could command the attention of every crowd she wrestled in front of. Yet despite her success both in Japan and internationally, she doesn't seem to be treated with the same reverence as her contemporaries. In this 2-part episode of WrestleLore, I'm going to be talking about Nakano's 1,000 plus day reign as WWWA World Singles Champion, going in depth on 8 title matches in this reign, and I'll hopefully be able to explain what makes his reign so special, and why I believe Bull Nakano stands as one of the most underappreciated wrestlers, not just in Japanese women's wrestling history, but in all of wrestling. Nakano made her debut in 1983, at just 15 years of age, competing under her real name, Keiko Nakano. After claiming the AJW Junior Championship aged just 16, she adopted the name Bull Nakano, and became a protege of Dump Matsumoto, joining her Villainous Alliance stable. In July of 1985, she would claim the AJW Championship, which she would hold for just over 900 days. During this time, she would win the 1985 Tag League with Matsumoto, and would have 2 reigns as WWA Tag Team Champion, once each with Matsumoto and Kondo Saito. She would lose the AJW title to Yumi Ogura in January 1988, but would barely miss a step, quickly claiming her 3rd WWA Tag title reign, this time with Grizzly Iwamoto. Shortly after, she would win the AJW Grand Prix, the company's premier singles tournament, solidifying herself as a major singles threat going forward. Nakano would achieve all of this before turning 22, and just 4 days shy of her 22nd birthday, she would contend for the crown jewel of Zenjo, the vacant WWA World Championship, facing Mitsuko Nishiwaki for the top prize in Japanese women's wrestling. Nakano is the first to make her way to the ring, her entrance being shot from a handheld camera from below, making her look like an absolute monster even before she shoves it away. Nakano is doing such great work here, kicking away the ring steps and snatching flowers from the attendants, looking like a real villain straight away. Nishiwaki appears much more reserved as she makes her entrance, but it doesn't last long, as she immediately drops Nakano with a clothesline. Her attempted follow-up is countered though, and Nishiwaki flies through the ropes and into the attendants outside the ring. She's down on the outside for a long time as a result of this mistake, and when she finally does begin to recover, we see why. The impact of her landing on the exposed floor has busted her open. Nakano's Gokumonto allies throw Nishiwaki back into the ring, and Bull immediately begins targeting her obvious weak spot, grinding her fist against the wound. She follows up with a pile driver, but Nishiwaki is just about able to bridge out of the pin. Nishiwaki goes right on the offensive with a single leg takedown, before firing off vicious boots at Nakano's leg and midsection. Nakano manages to turn the tide with a short palm strike and a nasty stomp when Nishiwaki grabs at Nakano's hair, before sending Nishiwaki into the ropes and crushing her with a vicious lariat, one that appears to wrap round her entire head when it connects. Nishiwaki manages to kick out the pinfall attempt, before Nakano gleefully drags her onto the apron. Bull applies the rear naked choke, dangling Nishiwaki over the edge before dropping her to the floor. The attendants check on her, as she's bleeding severely now, while Nakano tastes that blood on the apron. Nishiwaki is not beaten yet though, and with her crimson mask wiped away, returns to the ring. Her attempt at a lockup is slapped away by Nakano. Nakano is able to withstand her follow-up attack, and Nishiwaki face plants into the mat, her cut wide open and beginning to cover her face once more. She manages to connect on the second attempt, forcing Nakano down to the canvas, but the third is evaded by Nakano, sending Nishiwaki to the outside once again. There is no reprieve this time though, as Bull pursues her. Nishiwaki returns to the ring, and there is a brief standoff. Nakano connects with a series of low kicks that send Nishiwaki outside once again, and Nakano immediately gives chase, and Nishiwaki once again returns to the ring immediately. Nakano slams her hands on the apron, and Nishiwaki's strategy of attempting to frustrate Nakano seems to be paying off, as she angrily paces outside the ring. When she re-enters, Nishiwaki goes on the offensive, grabbing Nakano's hair and delivering a series of headbutts. Unfortunately though, they barely faze Bull, and she connects with another brutal lariat, before forcing her outside with a flurry of boots. Nakano follows and drags her around ringside, placing her against a ring post. She attempts the lariat, but Nishiwaki evades, Nakano brutally wrapping her own arm around the ring post. Nishiwaki drags Nakano into the ring, and immediately begins aggressively targeting that right arm, driving it into her knee and tying it in the ropes, before locking in a Fujiwara armbar in the middle of the ring. As Nakano begins to power out of the hold, Nishiwaki climbs to the top rope, connecting with a missile drop kick, but Nakano is able to bridge out of the pin at 2. Nishiwaki follows up with a powerbomb, but once again Nakano is able to kick out at 2. Nakano manages to avoid Nishiwaki's top rope attack, before nailing a gorgeous bridging German suplex for 2. Nishiwaki attempts to return the favour, though Nakano is able to fight out of the hold. Nishiwaki responds with an elbow, before nailing the German suplex for another 2 count. The damage she's endured, the blood loss, and the sheer exhaustion of this fast-paced match is too much for Nishiwaki though, and Nakano is the first to recover. She drills her opponent with a brutal Thunderfire powerbomb, and while Nishiwaki does manage to kick out, she's a hair too late, allowing Nakano to win the match and claim the red belt for the first time in her career. I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed this match, especially considering it was my first time watching Mitsuko Nishiwaki. Both women played their roles to perfection, crafting a tight, fast-paced and compelling 7-minute bout that kept both women looking strong, while firmly establishing Bull Nakano's dominance moving forward. It's a really smart match to kick off Nakano's reign. Nishiwaki's bleeding almost immediately after being thrown to the outside. A simple but incredibly effective moment that frames her as a valiant underdog and highlights Nakano's cruelty. Bull's sadism is on full display as she mercilessly targets the wound and even licks the blood, a visceral image that really sticks with you. Nakano's balance of dominance and vulnerability is something I'm going to end up mentioning over and over in this video, but it bears repeating. It's a huge part of what makes her matches so compelling and special. Her striking here is particularly brutal, the way her arm wraps around Nishiwaki's head on a lariat, and Nishiwaki sells it like death. Even Nakano's smaller strikes, her short punches and stomps, feel malicious and dangerous, exactly the presence she needs to project, while still allowing her opponent's resilience to shine through when she pushes back. Nishiwaki plays her part brilliantly as the relentless babyface, adapting her tactics throughout the match. Each is a viable strategy, but ultimately, none are enough. Many of Nishiwaki's attacks barely faze Nakano, who often laughs them off, continuing the legacy of the cruel powerhouse heel popularised by her mentor, Dump Matsumoto. Even so, Nishiwaki fights tooth and nail to the very end, valiantly kicking out after the Thunderfire powerbomb, but just a moment too late. Altogether, it's an intense, violent little match that sets the tone perfectly for what's to come during Bull Nakano's reign. The next match we're going to talk about is Nakano's first defence of the title, against a 19-year-old future legend in her first shot at the red belt, Manami Toyota. Manami Toyota had earned her shot by winning the Japan Grand Prix a month earlier, in June 1990, defeating Akira Hokuto, Medusa and Yumiko Hotta to win the tournament. Nakano and Toyota would face each other dozens of times in singles and tag team matches throughout the 90s, though I believe that this is their first ever match against each other. Toyota would be the first to make her entrance, the ring being covered in pink streamers as she is announced. Nakano emerges next, glaring at Toyota and the camera with sheer disdain as she walks to the ring, which gets smothered in black and white streamers. Nakano slaps away Toyota's offer of a handshake, and Toyota responds by taking the fight right to Nakano as the bell rings. Toyota's dropkicks barely phase Nakano, as she absorbs 3 of them before she wipes out Toyota with a huge lariat, though her foot stomp pin only gets a 2 count. Nakano goes straight back to work, breaking Toyota's eyes across the top rope before powering her up with a choke and slamming her on the mat. She tries the pin again, this time with a knee across her throat, but Toyota is able to kick out once more. Toyota comes up fighting, throwing strikes at Nakano's midsection. These strikes do minimal damage though, and Toyota's 2 running attacks end with her on the floor, the second coming after a really nasty hair pull from Nakano. Bull smiles as she brushes off Toyota's attacks, before catching her crossbody and slamming her down. Toyota recovers quickly and stares down Nakano, whose smirk conveys her disrespect of Toyota and how little of a threat she perceives her opponent to be. Nakano offers the lockup, and Toyota responds with another dropkick, though yet again it has no effect. Toyota immediately tries a different strategy, managing to take Nakano down with a drop toe hold, but Bull manages to immediately power out of the hold like it's nothing. When Toyota gets back to her feet, Nakano walks her down, and proceeds to begin throwing her across the ring, getting a 2 count after a float over suplex. Bull stays on her with some vicious submissions, but the crowd begins to firmly get behind Toyota, and she manages to break out of a dragon sleeper after repeated kicks and knees to Nakano's head. Toyota continues to fight, but a single right hand from Nakano knocks her to the canvas, and she follows up with some more reckless kicks to Toyota's head. Toyota counters Nakano's attempted back body drop with a backslide, but Nakano is out before the referee can count 1, immediately tying up Toyota's legs and pinning her to the mat with her knee. Toyota screams and grabs to the rope as Nakano wrenches her back violently by her hair. And while she does manage to reach the ropes and break the hold, Nakano answers by slamming her weight into Toyota's back. Nakano's lariat attempt is countered, but Toyota releases the armbar, opting to pick up the pace with a drop kick and crossbody, although it barely gets a 2 count. Toyota tries for a lariat, but Nakano sees it coming and ducks, before dumping Toyota on the back of her head with a horrifying backdrop. Toyota though once again manages to kick out. Nakano's diving leg lariat only gets 2, but she follows up with a scoop slam before heading to the top rope. She attempts the leg drop, but Toyota manages to avoid it, immediately capitalising with a leapfrog and victory roll, though it only gets 2. The crowd is really behind Toyota now, as she manages to force Nakano over the top rope and to the outside. Her dive fails to connect though, and she crashes to the floor. Nakano taunts her in the ring as the crowd chants for Toyota, and she stumbles ringside, before eventually making her way to the apron, at which point Nakano drags her to the top rope. Toyota escapes with a barrage of slaps that send Nakano tumbling to the mat, but Bull manages to counter Toyota's attack, driving her face first into the canvas, following up with a Northern Light suplex that gets a very close 2 count. Nakano lines her up for a lariat, but Toyota counters with a massive bridging German for 2. She tries to follow up, but Nakano turns her inside out of a lariat. The powerbomb is reversed via a Manami roll, albeit not the cleanest one, before Nakano attempts a pin herself, though Toyota kicks out at 2. Nakano sends Toyota off the ropes, and nails her with one of the most brutal lariats of all time, turning her inside out and causing her to land on the top of her head at a horrific angle. She follows it up with an incredibly forceful powerbomb to win the match and retain the title. This is another excellent match. Much like the bout of Nishiwaki, it's structured as an extended squash, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with that when it tells such a compelling story. Here, Toyota is cast as the underdog, struggling to solve the riddle that is Bull Nakano, who works so well here as a near insurmountable force, who seems entirely unfazed by anything thrown her way. Toyota's offense is spirited but futile, continuing to fight even as Nakano mauls her with brutal strikes and submissions. Nakano, for her part, looks like an unstoppable monster, practically toying with Toyota in the early going, laughing off her attacks and seeming to dish out punishment more for her own amusement than to actually win the match. What elevates this match beyond a simple beatdown is a dynamic shift in the second half. Toyota refuses to fade, and her tenacity begins to turn the tide. The match transitions from a one-sided display of dominance into something much more competitive, with both wrestlers trading high-impact offense in a fast-paced and emotionally charged closing stretch. The crowd is completely behind Toyota, a sign of things to come that at such an early stage of her career, she's already established herself as a beloved fan favourite. In the end, Nakano is forced to treat Toyota as a real threat, and to unleash everything in her arsenal to put her away, culminating in a brutal finish that reaffirms Nakano as a terrifying force, while elevating Toyota into the personification of grit and determination. It's a beautifully told story of dominance and defiance that turns what could be a generic squash match into something genuinely gripping and memorable. I highly recommend this one. Nakano's next defence would be a bloody steel cage match against her former stablemate, who had set out to establish herself as the most dangerous monster in Zenjo, a woman who would go on to become arguably the most legendary Japanese women's powerhouse of all time, Aja Kong. In the wake of Matsumoto's retirement in 1988, Nakano had formed the Gukumonto stable, forming a regular tag team with Aja Kong. Aja would leave the stable at some point in 1990, bringing with her Bison Kimura to form the Jungle Jack tag team, which would grow into a fully fledged stable over the next few years. Kong had been a junior member of Matsumoto's faction, and after her retirement, Kong had begun to firmly establish herself as a threat on the roster, winning the All Pacific title in April of 1990. By September, Kong had her sights set firmly on Nakano and the WWWA World title, seeking to prove herself to be the most dominant monster in the promotion. Nakano and Kong clashed in a non-title steel cage match in which Kong emerged victorious. This match is the main event of the second WrestleMarine Pied event, with the stage set for a brutal rematch. No pinfalls, no submissions, no referee, and no disqualifications. Escape is the only way to win. Before the match, we see a face-to-face between Nakano and Kong backstage, though it almost immediately breaks down into a pull-apart brawl. Kong is the first to make her way to the ring, armed with two Itaguns, weapons introduced by Matsumoto the previous decade. Nakano heads to the ring, but is immediately attacked on the outside by Kong, who begins viciously attacking her with a pair of scissors as they begin brawling into the crowd. Kong attempts to return to the ring first, but Nakano manages to cut her off, throwing her into the chairs. Nakano beckons for Kong to enter the ring, and she cuts her off with a bicycle kick as the match can finally begin. It doesn't take long for Kong to take the advantage, a series of headbutts stunning Nakano before she is sent headfirst into the cage wall. Kong is relentless as she targets the cut that's beginning to form, attacking with huge right hands and biting Nakano's forehead. Kong resists the attempted two-handed chokeslam, but can't avoid the lariat, another vicious one that is almost a looping punch to the side of Kong's head. After she nails a face crusher out of the corner, Nakano looks for it again, but Kong counters with the Hurricane, the first of many in this match, and Nakano falls between the ropes and the cage. Kong tries again and misses, but connects immediately after. She begins to fire off Hurricanes absolutely relentlessly, each one knocking Nakano into the ropes or sending her to the canvas. If she does go down though, Bull returns to her feet right away, with Kong waiting with another Hurricane ready for her when she recovers. Nakano almost makes a comeback, ducking a back fist and connecting with an Enzu lariat, but Kong absorbs it, responding with yet more crushing back fists. It's amazing to see Nakano being so utterly dominated here, especially after her dominant performances against Nishiwaki and Toyota. I love the way she sells Kong's back fists. Every single one either knocks her into the ropes or down to the canvas. When they knock her to the mat, she gets up immediately, but she's returning to her feet on instinct alone, unable to avoid the next back fist that's surely on its way. Kong using her Hurricane over and over again could otherwise diminish its effectiveness and potency, but I don't think that's the case at all here. Nakano is being absolutely destroyed by the move every time it connects, and her setting means that we can attribute her continued survival to her inhuman toughness, as opposed to any inherent weakness of the Hurricane. It's important to note that at this time, the Hurricane wasn't really a finisher for Kong, more of a signature strike that she used repeatedly, somewhat akin to Misawa and his elbows. After a disgusting Hurricane to the back of Nakano's head, Kong begins to make the climb and escape the cage, though Nakano manages to cut her off with what appears to be some sort of flail that she has passed by one of her seconds. She strikes repeatedly before sending Kong into the ropes, though Kong manages to wipe her out with a lariat. Kong sends her off the ropes this time, looking for an Hurricane, but Nakano ducks and connects with a back fist of her own. Nakano gets fired up and goes on the offensive, connecting with a lariat, a series of kicks, and a facebuster. Aja Kong rocks her with the avalanche, and I believe it's Bison Kimura who throws an Itakan into the cage, but Nakano intercepts it and begins blasting Kong in the head. Kong absorbs shot after shot, as the can loses its structure entirely. though eventually she crumbles after a particularly vicious headshot. Nakano heads towards her seconds and catches her signature nunchucks, before beginning to light up Kong with some nasty strikes to the head. Nakano flies off the top rope with an attack that's halfway between a stomp and a big boot, before trying to escape the cage. Kong cuts her off, retrieving the flail and attacking Nakano's left leg with it. She trades it for a Ritokan, continuing to blast Nakano's leg. I'm a big fan of weapons-based limb work. I think it can add a great deal to weapons-based matches, adding a strategic element that can otherwise be lost in the bloodlust and spectacle. In this match, it's even more fitting. Kong's targeting of Nakano's limbs is a great strategy in a match where one has to climb a cage to escape. As Kong's attack continues, Nakano is given the scissors that Kong had used in the beginning of the match, before going on the offensive. Nakano has her own interpretation of limb targeting, calling back to Dump Matsumoto's legendary attack on Yukari Amori. She stabs Kong in her right arm over and over with the scissors, drawing blood and causing Kong to cower in fear, a rare sight. This mutilation continues, with Nakano stabbing Kong in her head as well. I'd like to think that Nakano chose to target Kong's right arm in an attempt to nullify the Hurricane, but there's always a chance the attack was driven by bloodlust alone. In response to this brutality, Kong's allies, Medusa and Bison Kimura, attempt to intervene, leading to skirmishes with Nakano's seconds, Bat Yoshinaga and Kyoku Inoue. Medusa manages to scale the cage, though Nakano sees her coming and cuts her off, before Inoue drags her down. Medusa hurls a huge length of rope to Kong, which she uses to choke Nakano in the corner. Nakano manages to slip free and turns the rope against Kong, wrapping it around her injured arm and attempting to tie her to the ring ropes. I love the way Kong stops Nakano escaping next, shaking the top rope until Nakano loses balance, before catching another Ritokan and cracking Bull in the head repeatedly. Inoue climbs the cage and provides Nakano with an incredibly long chain, while Medusa attempts to pull it away. Nakano wraps it around Kong's neck, with Inoue holding her in place, and Nakano targets Kong's arm with the Itakan, while Jungle Jack and Gokumonto brawl. Nakano ties one end of the chain to the ring ropes and begins landing strikes halfway between axe kicks and leg drops, before attempting to escape. Kong grabs the flail though, and manages to cut her off by going after her leg injury again. Kong lands almost a power slam off the top rope and tries to climb, but this time it's Nakano, attacking the injured arm, who stops her. She follows up with a scary powerbomb, but misses the leg drop, and Kong folds her with a huge German suplex. She catches a huge staff tossed by Medusa, and goes to work on Nakano, climbing to the top rope for a diving shot. Inoue interferes, grabbing hold of the staff and distracting Kong, allowing Nakano to pull her off the top rope and drop her on top of her head with a horrific Ganso bomb. She climbs to the top of the cage, but opts not to escape, steadying herself and praying, before flying off the cage with a massive leg drop. The force of it immediately bounces her back to her feet, and she rushes to escape the cage, making her escape to retain the title. She's incredibly emotional as she celebrates with Inoue and Yoshinaga, and the crowd is ecstatic, chanting for Nakano, throwing streamers and high-fiving her as she's carried around ringside. Post-match, we get a heated confrontation between members of Jungle Jack and Gokumonto, as well as the 3WA Tag Champions Akira Hokuto and Suzuki Manami, setting up a tag title match between the Marine Wolves and Jungle Jack, and a hair vs hair match between Nakano and Inoue and Kong and Kimura, before a brawl closes out WrestleMarinepiad. This match is carnage. The pre-match scuffle and Kong's attack as Nakano makes her entrance set the tone for the match, and it only escalates from there. The two take pleasure and pride in the pain they inflict on each other, and while weapons-heavy matches can sometimes feel like two wrestlers going through the motions as they move from weapon to weapon, spot to spot, here it feels like a real war, an arms race, the ferocity of both women taking it to its logical, violent conclusion. I think the most polarising part of the match is probably Aja Kong's Hurricane Span. I've seen it criticised quite heavily online, with people claiming that it takes them out of the match, and that it devalues the move as a finisher. As I mentioned earlier, the spinning back fist wasn't established as Kong's finisher yet, so the criticism doesn't fully apply, though I can see how some may see it as damaging the credibility of the move. For me though, I don't think it does. Nakano sells every single strike like it's killing her, each Hurricane either putting her out on her feet or knocking her to the mat. I never get the impression that these strikes aren't powerful or that they aren't effective. What he considered for me was illustrate two things. First, it showed Kong to be a relentless monster, preying on and destroying the defenceless Nakano. Second, it showed Nakano to be relentless too, refusing to stay down in the face of Kong's onslaught. I think this barrage really managed to elevate both Kong and Nakano as competitors, something that is very difficult to achieve, but really resonated with me. I love the fighting occurring on the outside of the cage between Jungle Jack and Gokumonto, desperately trying to give their leader any sort of advantage in the cage, and more than justifying it as a stipulation to prevent the match from entirely breaking down. It didn't take anything away from the action inside the ring. If anything, it only enhanced it. Nakano's use of the scissors here harkens back to her and Aja's mentor, and while there may not be a spot quite as gruesome as the scissors sticking out of Amori's arm, it's still incredibly shocking how merciless Nakano is. Kong's bloody arm is a sight to behold, especially considering the permanent scar Nakano's stabbing would leave behind. I've never been a huge fan of escape rules in cage matches. A slow climb to escape sucking the air out of the room after an otherwise compelling finishing sequence. Here though, the stipulation is absolutely perfect, limiting the ability of the other parties involved to interfere and requiring a massive amount of damage to be done to one's opponent to be able to buy time to escape the cage. The match is perfectly structured, a steady escalation that keeps the audience transfixed as the action gets more and more intense, building to the insane climax with that magnificent leg drop off the cage. I think it's important to note that Aja Kong is only 20 years old in this match, and Nakano, the grizzled veteran, is only 22. To put on this match this early into their careers is a testament to the insane talent of both women. Nakano interviewed Kong in September of 2021, a special shout out to Moscow Disco for translating and transcribing it, and they spoke about this match, and about the finish itself. Aja says she was thinking as she was laying on the mat, quote, "I don't care if I die, just drop it," before the leg drop hit, and Nakano said she expected to die with her spine sticking out of her body. This should tell you all you need to know about the state of mind of both women in this match. I think this is one of the greatest cage matches I've ever seen, and probably one of the greatest matches I've ever seen full stop. And while I normally save recommendations for the end of the episode, I cannot stress enough how highly I recommend you seek this match out. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. The last match I wanted to talk about in this first part was Nakano's first defence of 1991, against another of the all-time greats of Japanese women's wrestling. A woman who had been the president of the Bull Nakano fan club prior to joining the dojo, the Dangerous Queen, Akira Hokuto. Hokuto is out first, and gets bathed in blue streamers as she enters the ring. Nakano enters the ring, with an awesome combination of massive hair, red championship belt, nunchucks, and cloak. Just like in the match with Toyota, Nakano slaps away the handshake, and Hokuto responds with a German suplex before spiking her with a pile driver. Nakano gets her knees up to counter Hokuto's splash, before dropping her face first with a military press. Hokuto's pace allows her to catch ball with a pin attempt, though she manages to quickly escape. Nakano sees the threat posed by Hokuto's pace, and drags her outside, where her power and brawling ability should give her the advantage. She drags her around the ring, retrieving the hammer, despite the timekeeper's effort to hide it. She hits Hokuto in the head with it, before slamming her face first into the first row of chairs, and returning to the ring. When Hokuto gets back in the ring, Bull is back on her straight away, dropping her with a lariat, though Hokuto manages to bridge out of the pin at 2. Nakano sends her off the ropes, but this time it's Hokuto who connects with a huge lariat, and Nakano who manages to kick out at 2. Hokuto tries to stay on her, connecting with a flurry of nasty palm strikes, but a single reply from Nakano is enough to drop her. Nakano is in complete control now, brutalising her with strikes and chokes, and using the ropes to assist her. If you've seen anything from Hokuto in the past, you know she's more than capable of being a torturer herself, and when she eventually manages to power out with a rear naked choke, she goes to work. Hokuto locks in a torturous Boston Crab, bending Nakano at close to a right angle. She transitions into a half crab, before switching to a modified surfboard, which Nakano is able to escape by biting Hokuto's hand. Nakano turns the tables with a high angle crab of her own, before switching to the Scorpion Deathlock. Nakano brings her back to her feet, but Hokuto counters the lariat with a nasty Fujiwara armbar that grounds Nakano. Before Bull can escape the hold, Hokuto sends her off the ropes, landing a pair of perfect drop kicks for a 2 count. A great looking piledriver gets 2 again, though Hokuto maintains control of her larger, now grounded opponent, returning to the rear naked choke. Nakano manages to catch Hokuto with some wild kicks to escape, punishing her with a pair of disgusting high angle backdrop suplexes, though neither is enough to get the 3 count. Nakano boots her out of the ring, before she climbs the ropes and throws herself at her opponent. It's a far cry from a graceful attack, but it's definitely effective. Nakano immediately connects with the leg drop, and she is furious as the crowd applauds a stunning kick out. Hokuto is motionless though, and Nakano drills her with another piledriver, before climbing to the top rope yet again. This time though, Hokuto avoids the leg drop, and when the impact bounces Nakano to her feet, Hokuto immediately hooks her for a tiger suplex for a very close 2 count. It's Hokuto's turn now to scale the turnbuckles, and she blasts Nakano 4 times in a row with huge missile drop kicks, and there are audible screams when Nakano kicks out at 2. Bull drills Hokuto with a DDT and a springboard Gamangiri before climbing the ropes once more, though this time it's Hokuto who's able to counter, drop kicking her out of the ring before connecting with a somersault senton to the floor. Hokuto makes her way to the top rope yet again as Nakano recovers and returns to the ring, but Hokuto is too slow, and she is dragged off the top rope. Nakano makes the climb, and her underling, Tomoko Watanabe, hits the ring, hoisting up Hokuto and passing her to a waiting Nakano. She lands the Avalanche Tombstone Piledriver, the same move that broke Hokuto's neck in 1987, and covers her for the pin, but the referee refuses to count it after the blatant interference. Nakano powers up Hokuto and drills her with a Thunderfire powerbomb, but Hokuto kicks out at 2, stunning Nakano and the crowd. She climbs to the top rope for the leg drop, but Hokuto manages to intercept her with a superplex for 2. She lands the Northern Lights bomb, but once again it's not enough, and Nakano manages to barely kick out. Hokuto sends her off the ropes, but Nakano ducks the spin kick and lands one final backdrop to get the pinfall and retain the title. Another great title match from Nakano here. This is much closer to the first 2 matches I talked about in terms of both dynamics and structure, with Nakano once more playing the bullying powerhouse to Hokuto's underdog, though she's definitely a more credible threat than either Nishiwaki or Toyota. Hokuto is a couple of years away from being the dangerous queen we'd come to know and love, but she's definitely a worthy challenge for Nakano, certainly the most challenging opponent she'd faced so far, besides Aja Kong. I think the match itself is really strong. The beginning of the match mirrors Nakano's bouts with Nishiwaki and Toyota, with Hokuto taking the fight to the champ, before being quickly and violently shut down, which puts over Hokuto's fearlessness and Nakano's strength. Where this match differs is in the offense of the challenger. In the aforementioned matches it's sporadic and rarely sustained. They are brief flurries in spite of Nakano's overwhelming pressure. That is the case here too, except for a segment in the middle of the match, where Hokuto manages to turn the tables completely, nailing the Tiger Suplex and the consecutive missile dropkicks. This period of control does 2 things that I think really help the match stand out. It gives Nakano a chance to sell for a segment, something that I really like, and it makes the match immediately more compelling. Secondly, it helps present Hokuto as being a viable challenger, someone who could potentially dethrone Nakano, making the rest of the match a must-see experience, as it feels like Nakano's reign is in serious jeopardy. What I think I enjoy most about this match is that everything that happens between the moves and spots adds to the credibility of the match. It's something that I've touched on throughout the series, when talking about Super Dragon in the Steam vs Dragon episode, and Masanobu Fuchi in the Super Generation Army vs Surutugun episode, since it's something that those 2 excelled at, just as Nakano does here. Bull performs a lot of high impact moves in this match, but it's the more understated yet malicious attacks that convince you she really hates her opponent, and that she wants to really hurt her. She recklessly attacks Hokuto when she's down, and tortures her with submissions. It's less about finishing the match quickly, and more about taking pleasure in Hokuto's suffering, and I find it very effective maintaining a suspension of disbelief and making it a captivating match, as you never doubt Nakano's hatred of the challenger, and you become emotionally invested in Hokuto's struggle against the odds. I'd say my only real criticism of the match is in Hokuto's selling, mainly towards the end of it. That's not to say she doesn't sell at all, although her selling isn't compelling or believable, as it generally is. My main gripe is that she doesn't sell the after effects of some of the bigger moves as much as I'd like her to. I never felt like either woman was suffering from compounding, accumulating damage, Rather, they would sell immediately after the impact, but shortly after would carry on as if they were fully fit. Nakano is somewhat guilty of this too, but as I mentioned earlier, she's Bull Nakano, a powerhouse demon, and I think she can get away with it more. I can't extend that same courtesy to Hokuto though, especially pre-Dangerous Queen Hokuto, in her role as scrappy, technically sound underdog. The Avalanche Tombstone in particular I feel should have been treated with much more weight than it was. While the match does end shortly after, I wish she'd been able to convey the severity of the move more effectively with the time she had, especially considering her history with it. That being said, I think the match is still very strong indeed, and it kept me invested from start to finish. With that win, we've covered the first year of Bull Nakano's 3 WA title reign. These 4 title matches I think offer a great insight into what made her such a special wrestler and such a great champion during this period. Nakano embraced what made Dump Matsumoto such a compelling wrestler to watch in the 1980s, portraying an unhinged, imposing and merciless heel very well. But while Nakano may not have been as frightening or hated as her mentor, she was a much more adaptable wrestler, which I think comes across in the 4 matches I've talked about here. While they may share commonalities, they all feel distinct from each other, with different psychologies and structures that show Nakano's range as a competitor. I'll go into it in more detail in part 2, but her versatility is what I believe makes her so special. Her ability to be so captivating when she's dominating and when she's being dominated, to work bloody 30-minute wars and 8-minute squashes, with opponents of varying sizes and styles, and for them all to be uniquely compelling. Thank you so much for watching the first part of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned for part 2, where we'll be looking at 4 more title matches from Nakano's reign, and witnessing Naja Kong step up once again to push Bull to her absolute limits. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.